The first step in building my coffee table ottoman was to do a little wood turning to make the legs. When it comes to turning wood, I actually have little to no idea what I'm doing. I bought an inexpensive lathe on a whim as a sort of birthday present to myself last year, and I've been playing around with it whenever I have some free time, but with mostly mixed results. But as usual, my utter lack of patience and overactive mind led me to dive right in and start making some furniture with it. I used some scrap wood to make some blanks that I could play around with to figure out what kind of shape I wanted to go with, but honestly a lot of the design was just based on what I can actually manage to achieve at the lathe. You can see all the nicks and gouges on my test pieces, signs of my struggles along the way as I tried to come up with a spindle design that works. In the end, this is the sort of shape I'm after, something simple, classic, and achievable for me. I want the overall design of this coffee table ottoman to feel really classic. It will be sitting in the living room near our very modern TV wall, so I think it will be a nice juxtaposition of old and new design aesthetics in that area of the house. If you enjoy watching people make stuff, please consider subscribing to our channel, clicking the bell icon, and enabling YouTube notifications on your device so you'll be alerted when we release a new video. The support really helps grow our channel and allows us to keep doing what we're doing. I learned a lot making these legs, most importantly how much I enjoy turning wood. There's something really special about taking a solid block of wood and carving it into something beautiful that feels a little separate from what I'm used to doing in the shop, cutting wood on the table saw, gluing up panels, etc., etc. There's something about this more detailed work that I feel naturally drawn to. It requires a sort of meditative focus, but it's not all zen. One wrong slip of the chisel can completely ruin the piece and also harm you. But there's something about that balance between needing to be delicate and free with the chisels, but also rigidly alert that is really satisfying. If you're a woodworker who hasn't tried turning, I highly recommend you give it a shot. It's a craft worth experiencing, and once I started playing around with it, the ideas of what I could potentially do with it just started flowing. I think it'll add a whole new dimension to what I'm able to dream up and create. Of course, as a very new beginner, I did have a snag. Luckily, it was a minor enough catch, and I was able to save it with some wood glue and filler. They're not perfect matches, but that's what handmade is all about, right? With the four legs made well enough, I was ready to move on to the rest of the frame. I'm using red oak again for this project. If you watched our last post, I just used some of this to make a little accent table / plant stand. I'll leave a link to that video so you can check it out if you're interested. I had just a bit of leftover wood from that project, so it meant I didn't have to buy much more for this one by going with the same species. Also, I plan to stain the whole thing black, and I know the nice pronounced grain patterns in the red oak are going to look great in black because I did the same thing with our kitchen cabinets that I made a couple years ago, and I still love how those turned out. I realized when I dry fit some of the pieces together that I didn't like how the bottom rail was looking. It felt too chunky to me, so I decided to rip it down further to create a thinner board. The top and bottom rails are going to get attached to the legs with dominoes. Cutting the mortises into the rails was easy enough, but I did hold my breath doing it in the legs themselves. Any mess-ups here would cost a ton in time to redo, and even being able to get 4 legs to somewhat match felt like a kind of beginner's luck that I might not be able to replicate. I'm going to be adding a very subtle curve to the top rails to help soften the look of the perimeter so that it doesn't all start to feel too boxy. For this step, I'm just doing my usual template making with some MDF and then routing that shape out on the actual workpiece with my fancy new trim bit. I also rounded over the edges of the curves to soften it up further, and then sanded everything before assembling. I have to say this was one of the easiest, least stress-inducing glue-ups ever for me. Maybe I've learned from my past mistakes, or maybe it's just because I was dealing with mostly flat surfaces and 90-degree joints. I started by gluing up the short sides of the table first, then attaching those sides to the long rails to form the box. I added some braces to the corners by cutting down some scraps at a 45-degree angle. This should add some support for the frame, but also it will be what the top rests on and gets secured to later. I knew I wanted to hide the section where the upholstered cushion top meets the wooden frame, so I came up with a solution that helps bury the top slightly into the frame, so the cushion feels more embedded in the frame, which I think helps make the two materials feel more cohesive when they come together. Essentially, I made a little picture frame border that is slightly wider than the opening in the table that will frame out the cushion top when it's installed. I used miter clamps to glue this border together independent of the table first. These clamps work really well to tightly secure a miter joint while gluing, and any indents left in the wood can easily be filled with some wood filler later. Then I attached the border to the top of the table frame. While that was drying, I moved on to working on the bottom shelf. I wanted this table to be both Ottoman and coffee table, and I think having a shelf at the bottom for books and remotes supports that initial design need. At this point, however, I ran out of wood and had to turn to some scraps of red oak plywood I had lying around from when I made our kitchen cabinets. With a little iron-on edge banding, you shouldn't be able to spot the difference between these slats and the rest of the table. At least that's what I told myself. To attach the shelf slats, I glued on a support piece to the inside of the bottom rails. As for the top, I started by cutting down a piece of plywood that the cushion will be mounted to. This is the foam and Dacron I'll be using. Dacron is essentially polyester batting designed to wrap around upholstery foam inserts to provide a softer and rounder look. The high-density foam is super firm and probably wouldn't be the softest to sit on, but should be plenty plush for us to rest our feet on. I knew we needed something stiff because we're going to be using a small wood board to rest cups and tea mugs on, and I wanted to ensure that the cushion wouldn't move much, causing drinks to spill. I used the plywood board to mark my foam, leaving about an inch of space on all sides of the board so that the foam will be a little larger than the board and wrap slightly around the edges, covering the hard plywood edge. To cut the foam, I used an electric knife I found on Amazon that I think people use to cut Thanksgiving turkeys with, but it worked perfectly on the foam. I've made a few seat cushions in the past, but I could never manage to get a nice plush look before, because I hadn't figured out the importance of batting yet. Using the Dacron over the foam should give me a nice, professionally plush upholstered cushion. I sprayed on some adhesive to tack the board down to the foam and then stapled the Dacron to the board. I made sure to spray some adhesive along the edges to help hold the batting to the sides as well, but I am making a mistake here that I didn't realize I was making until I tried to fit the cushion into the frame. By wrapping the Dacron all the way around the board, I added thickness to the bottom of the board, which prevents it from sitting nice and flat against the table frame. So I did some more research and realized that for a bench seat like this, I should not have wrapped the Dacron all the way around, but instead stapled it to the side of the plywood board and cut off the excess so that the bottom of the board remains nice and flat. Luckily, I was able to remove the staples and make the adjustment without having to remove it all. I'm using a black and white striped velvet to upholster the top. I feel like there's something both modern and classic about a black and white pattern like this, and it's a motif I'm hoping to subtly disperse around the house. But I know it's loud and might not be for everyone. I'm hoping it ties together when I'm finally done with the living room, but luckily if I do feel like it's not working once everything's in place, I can always reupholster the cushion later on down the road without too much effort. This is a no-sew kind of build because I really don't like sewing and I'm no good at it. It's just a matter of stapling opposing ends to the board, pulling tightly and adjusting as you go. I'll leave a link in the description to a video I found helpful if you want to learn more about upholstering cushions. The greatest piece of advice I got when looking into how to do this was not to be afraid to remove staples as you go. The whole thing really is a process of adding and subtracting staples until you have a nice smooth finish. If you pull the fabric too tight, you'll end up with a dip. If you don't apply enough tension, you could end up with a bump in that spot, and it's hard to apply the same amount of tension at every staple. So as you work your way along an edge, you'll see areas where it feels like you pulled too tight or not tight enough. In those spots, you can remove the staple and redo it to alleviate any inconsistencies, slowly getting as even of a run as you can manage. Like most things in life, it's a process of doing and then redoing until you get it right. Also, you want to make sure to add a lot of staples. As an Ottoman, this thing is going to be getting some abuse and you want to make sure the tension holds. At the corners, I tucked in the ends the way you would when wrapping a gift. The tough part about this for me was the thickness of the fabric. It's a heavyweight upholstery fabric, so too much material created too thick of a corner that might not fit into the frame. So I had to cut some of the excess off as I went in order to ensure a nice and flat corner. I stained the frame with the general finishes black and then added the slats for the bottom shelf. To seal the table frame, I used Osmo hard wax, which I love because it leaves the wood feeling like wood as opposed to that plastic feeling you get when wood is sealed with polyurethane. Then I just attached the top and it was done. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.